Greetings, dear colleagues, and thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm very happy to attend this conference virtually. The topic I'm going to speak to you about is collection analysis or evaluation or assessment. And I'm going to do a share so I can show you the PowerPoint. Okay. Here we go. And I'm going to enlarge that a little bit. Okay, my name is Dr. Teresa S. Welsh, and I'm very happy to be here, as I said, with you, dear colleagues. And let's start out talking about what is collection analysis, or evaluation is a similar term. It's a systematic evaluation of the quality of a library collection to determine the extent to which it meets the library's service goals and objectives and the information needs of its clientele. And this is the definition from the online dictionary of LIS. An analysis is a detailed examination of the elements or structure of something. Now, why is collection development or analysis, not development, analysis important? Analysis or evaluation of a collection is vital for the collection's development and management. Planning and building a useful and balanced collection of library materials should be based on an ongoing assessment of the information needs of a library's clientele, the analysis of usage statistics and demographic projections. Now, what are the types of collection analysis? According to Crowley-Lowe in 2002, there are two basic types of collection analysis: material-centered or collection-centered, such as determining how many materials in a collection support a particular curriculum. Or another way to say that is, what is the collection strength in a particular area? Second type of collection analysis is user-centered, and that includes analysis of things like circulation rates of library materials. Now, Cizik and Young, they kept these two main categories, but they subdivided them into qualitative and quantitative methodologies, so that you have collection-centered quantitative assessment, collection-centered qualitative assessment, user-centered quantitative assessment, and user-centered qualitative assessment. Let's take the first type, collection-centered quantitative. For example, it could be a comparison of two collections, a comparison of one collection to another or to a checklist, or the measurement of a collection over time is another way to assess it. Now, one example I really like is this article, A Comparative Analysis of the Religious Nonfiction Collections of a Public Library and a Christian Church Library. And in this study, Bolton used a checklist of religious nonfiction books in public library core collections nonfiction. And so she compared that list to two different types of libraries, a public library and a church library that were near each other. And surprisingly, she found that the public library collection had 7 times more of the books on that list than the church library had of religious nonfiction. Another type of quantitative collection-centered analysis is the checklist method. It's where you use any kind of checklist of, say, award winners, best of list from a reputable source, and you use that as a checklist to see how many of those are in a collection. One of my favorite types of those is the study, A Collection Analysis of African American Poetry Holdings in the de Grummond Collection. Now, this was a paper done by one of our students, and she's African American, and she's also was a poet. So this was natural for her to study this topic in Southern Mrs. de Grummond children and young adults literature collections. And to check that, she used 2 checklists. One was the Harlem Renaissance list, on a list of patents, a list of poets, and the other was a Black Arts Movement list from poets.org. So she checked these used these two lists, and what she found was the de Grummond collection had 100% of the poets that were listed on the Harlem Renaissance list, but only 38% from the Black Arts Movement. So why is that important? Well, this is important because if our state has a high African American population, so it would seem to be important to include African American poets in this collection. And you can see it does, the de Grummond collection does a very good job of African American poets from the Harlem Renaissance era, but not from the Black Arts Movement. So you could use this information to develop a acquisition list of the missing poets from that Black Arts Movement. Okay, here's one that's a qualitative study of a collection and a collection-centered analysis, and this one is on condition. And I really like this study as well. It's an examination of physical condition of a collection. And you can really use this, and this is open access. You can find this on the web. Again, as one of our students, this young man had experience working for the Army and saving and preserving some burned Army records. So he had knowledge and experience with documentation and preservation. He came to us because he wanted that MLIS degree to go with his experience. And what he did for his research project, he did a survey, a condition survey of the circulating collection in Cook Library, University of Southern Mississippi. He took a random sample of books on the shelves, and it was quite a large sample, and he tested it, and he recorded the information about age, the types and condition of the cover material, types of physical damage, the paper acidity, and he really wrote about good tools to measure these with, and the degree of paper brittleness. And what he found was rather shocking. He found that 80% of the books on the shelves contained acidic paper, and 21% of those books had already become embrittled. I particularly like this article because anyone can use this as a how-to if they want to assess the physical condition of their own collection. Another one is in the collection-centered qualitative analysis would be for content, a content analysis. It's an examination of the condition of a collection or the content analysis of a collection. And this is focused more on the content analysis. This, again, is a paper I'm fond of. It's a content analysis of Cinderella illustrated storybooks housed in the de Grummond collection. So this young woman, she identified all of the books that were illustrated storybooks about Cinderella, and she found that there were 71 of them in this collection. And well, not 71 in the collection, there were hundreds really of Cinderella illustrated storybooks, but she found 71 that had an animal helper in the story instead of a fairy godmother that we're used to in Western culture. And so she analyzed different aspects of these stories. And one thing she found was most of those were classified as Asian or multicultural. Had to sneeze there for a moment. Okay, this is a user-centered quantitative, and one example is a survey. User-centered quantitative analysis includes user surveys, and this article, Standardized Surveys Tools for Assessment in Archives and Special Collections by Yackel and Thibault, 2010. They had an archival metrics toolkit, and they developed that as the first step towards standardizing assessment tools for archives. And it includes 5 user-based survey instruments. So this is an attempt to have some kind of standardization assessment tools in archives. And it's based on user surveys. Now here's another type of user-centered quantitative analysis, and it's analyzing circulation rates. Monograph circulation over a 15-year period in a liberal arts university. And in this study, they found that about a third of the books that in the collection had not ever been checked out, not even once. And they found out that circulation within the first few years of acquisition was a good predictor of future circulation. In other words, new books in the collection, they either were circulated in the first few years or not. And if they weren't, it's very doubtful they would be in later years. Here's another user-centered quantitative analysis, a citation analysis. This is another type of usage because when you analyze the citations of articles, say, or dissertations or whatever, you're analyzing the works that those scholars used and cited. This particular one, a citation analysis of scholarly journals and communication studies. And the author, Romero, collected citation data every 5 years for 30 years. From articles in 116 communication journals. And he compiled a list of the 50 most cited communication journals. And this kind of information is very useful in collection development decisions. And some libraries, they even will do a citation analysis of the faculty and students to see, what things are they most citing? What are the most cited scholarly works used by our faculty and our students. Okay, user-centered qualitative. And an example of this would be interviews or qualitative responses to a questionnaire, say. And an example is Beyond the Scanned Image, a needs assessment of scholarly users of digital collections. And in this study, they analyzed interviews and also qualitative responses from workshops. And the purpose was to determine how these digital collections were used by the users and how they could be enhanced. Another type of qualitative analysis that's user-focused would be a focus group. And this is a good example. Is this a chapter book? Parent-involved categorization in a kindergarten classroom book collection. And this was focus groups of parent groups that were facilitated by librarians. They were asked to help the librarians categorize chapter books. And some of the things they found was that parents generally suggested categories based on book use rather than book subject. And they also found useful information. Parents would suggest categories for difficult to categorize books or books that fell into several different categories. Now, this is interesting. I have another category beyond these four, and that is mixed methodologies. And so here's one that includes user-centered quantitative and qualitative data. And it's small library research using qualitative and user-oriented research to transform a traditional library into information commons. And they, what they did was they looked at usage patterns, surveys, interviews, comment boards. So they combined the quantitative with the usage patterns, like circulation data, and surveys with also more in-depth interviews and comments. They found similar results from these various sources of data. They found that according to the users, there were more group study space was needed, more access to power to plug in their computers and other devices, and a quieter environment for study and research. Another type of mixed methodology also includes user-centered quantitative and qualitative data. Moving beyond citation analysis, how surveys and interviews enhance, enrich, and expand your research findings. And this is sort of an expanded citation analysis. The citation analysis is very quantitative of faculty publications and what they're citing in their bibliographies. But they combine that with surveys and interviews to determine the effectiveness of the library collections. And in the citation analysis, you can take it one more step and you can see not only what faculty are citing, but you can see how many of those sources they get from the library. And that can indicate holes in the collection. If it's something that faculty are frequently citing, for example, and the library doesn't have it, that maybe they should think about, getting that, acquiring that. Okay, and here's one that includes user-centered and collection-centered quantitative data. And the article is Serials Use in Postgraduates' Dissertations of Pharmaceutical Sciences, Collection Building by Citation Analysis. And this is just what we were talking about. The researchers did a citation analysis of pharmacology science graduate students. And then when they saw and ranked the most frequently cited sources, they compared that to the library's holdings to identify frequently cited sources that were not in the library's collection. And this can really help in acquiring the resources that were really needed for an academic library. Thank you for your attention. This was brief, but the results of this a bibliometric study I did that sort of is about this. I did a bibliometric study of scholarly LIS literature on collection analysis and evaluation, and I'm going to be presenting it at QQML 20. And I will also include this information that I reviewed with you about the different types of collection analysis. And I always put my conference presentations on SlideShare. So I will put this presentation and also the one I do in Barcelona on my SlideShare account, and you can see there the address there. Or you can search for me, Dr. T. Welsh, DRTWELSH. I'm on LinkedIn, SlideShare, Facebook, all of those things. So happy to be with you today, and thank you for inviting me.